We have written a good book about giving presentations. We should do some running before having the presentation. Get rid of a lot of the nervousness.
Did you do around the block and learning?
No, just back to the top.
The mountain. That's just like that.
Where you're standing head shields there. Well,
I'm a lazy person.
no, the way the camera goes, this is there. Chaos! You stand there, the camera, well, we'll fix that. It's good.
Okay.
Let's get this started.
The table's a bit higher. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the news. In politics, Senator Barack Obama's election campaign for US presidency is picking up steam. The novel use of so-called social media allows him to make inroads, especially with the younger and more tech-savvy population. Political observers speculate that use of such internet platforms will become much more common in the near future as websites like MySpace or Facebook are taken up by the common population. After French BNP Paribas blocked withdrawals of 3 hedge funds last month due to a, quote, complete evaporation of liquidity, investors and savers are attempting to liquidate assets deposited in highly leveraged financial institutions. Now, British bank Northern Rock requested security from the Bank of England. First observers are starting to talk about a possible upcoming financial crisis, which may actually originate in the United States housing market. It appears that this market is mostly backed by weak loans. In technology, Microsoft's new Windows Vista operating system is heavily criticized as being too slow on older computers and pushing consumers to upgrade them to newer models. The hardware industry, however, defends this as an investment into progress. Apple Computer, the highly acclaimed producer of the iPod, is making inroads into the mobile phone market with its so-called iPhone. Global market leader Nokia, however, states that they don't see this as a threat, citing their extensive experience and the superiority of hardware keyboards compared to the iPhone's touch-sensitive display. Python 3000, the new version of the popular Python programming language, has seen its first release. As this version breaks compatibility with the current Python 2, it will be interesting to watch the uptake of this new version as users upgrade their code bases. The developers of the programming language expect a speedy propagation, fueled by demand for the powerful new features. Staying with programming languages, the yet another Perl conference in Vienna has been a large success, with talks about the upcoming successor to the Perl programming language, which is slowly starting to take form. Now, it's been 9 years since those headlines. A lot has changed in that time. Perl 6 has seen 3 attempts at implementations, and one of them, Rakudo, has even been successful enough for us to gain the confidence to declare the first stable version of Perl 6 as a language. And Python? Python 3 is still trying to win developers. There are still more Python 2 developers than those using Python 3. There's still a lot more Python 2 code out there than there is written in Python 3. There are kids out there who haven't even been born when the first Python 3 release was made, and who are right now starting to get into programming themselves. Now personally, I don't care at all about Python. But when I see a mistake, be it one of the many of my own or someone else's, I usually try to at least learn something from it. And my conclusion from the Python 3 disaster is simple. Please, let's not repeat it. For 50 years, a lot of people have regarded Perl 6 as the programming language that has never been released and that never will be released. They could have easily even been right. Well, it's now written history that they were not. Perl 6 is finally here. And it's here to stay. It doesn't matter if you love it or if you hate it, or if you just don't care. It is a permanent part of the Perl community now. However, there's no point in hiding the fact that this does bring a new set of challenges. By its very nature as a new language that tries to learn from mistakes rather than repeat them, Perl 6 has already caused controversy. By being backwards incompatible, it forced people to pick sides. You were either one of the Perl 6 crazies with the high-floating visions of how to recreate the world, or one of the Perl 5 programmers and maintainers who try to keep their businesses up and running and who fight the marketing battle against the naysayers and the Perl is dead people. For a time, it looked dire. There was quite some hostility between the two sides. Thankfully, we have since overcome those and found some state of peaceful coexistence. There's even been some exchange of ideas going on. But all in all, the sides are still quite clearly kept apart. One outcome of this exchange of ideas has been sane and powerful matter-object protocols in both Perl 5 and Perl 6, as we've heard today in Nick's excellent talk. So just imagine what we could still gain by an even more free flow of ideas in both directions. When instead of being content with living side by side, we would actually live together. I, for one, would love to be in such a future. Well, we will not get there overnight, but I can show you one important step into this direction today. This step will remove the most divisive decision that you have to make. Previously, the question whether you wanted to use the new language with all its features or the massive amounts of pre-existing code. My goal for today is that after this talk, you will be able to get out and give Perl 6 a real try. That missing modules or existing code bases will no longer keep you from experiencing this great language. Or if you consider yourself to be a sixer already, that you will no longer restrain yourself to the existing Perl 6 module ecosystem. Because as Perl programmers, we are usually just not content with having our cake. We really want to eat it too. So how do I want to accomplish that? Well, by now, I really hope all of you have heard about Perl 5. So how did it start? In one of the YAPC talks I've seen, I learned about a thing called native call. Native call is Perl 6's way to access system libraries. Think of Perl 5's XS, just without all the horror that comes to mind, the nightmares about C macro soup and everything. Instead, native call is actually beautiful. Look at this. This is all pure Perl 6 code. Just like that, you can have Perl 6 load a library for you and access a function this library provides. You do not even have to have a C compiler installed to use this. And when I saw this, it got me thinking. The Perl 5 interpreter is also provided as a shared library. If I could use native call to load Perl 5 and use its embedding interface, then in theory, I should be able to build a bridge. And literally, within an hour of having this idea, I finished my very first Perl 6 program. And it did exactly that. It uses native call to load Perl 5 and run a hello world that's written in Perl 5, started from within Perl 6. At hello world would have been kind of an awkward name. I called the resulting module inline Perl 5. So a couple of days later, I could already use DBI, quickly followed by DBX class. This was a great start. But if I wanted to use Perl 6 in our projects at work, and I do, I'd have to ascend a much larger mountain. We use the Catalyst framework in pretty much all our projects at work. So to be able to use Perl 6, I'd have to be able to use it from within a Catalyst-based project. And this is where we start looking at some code. Catalyst creates a start script for you to run your application on a Perl-based web server. Such a script may look like this. It's a fairly straightforward Perl script. It essentially just loads a module and invokes a package method on this module. And this method then does all the real work. Now, how could we port this to Perl 6? Well, if you look at the first line, just replace Perl by Perl 6 initially, setting the environment variable just got translated to a different syntax. Then we load in Perl 5, and we create a new P5 object and call its run method, giving it a single string argument with the code we want to run. Now, Perl 5 also has a use method that does exactly the same as use does in Perl 5. And it's basically just sugar, so you wouldn't have to reach for an eval just to load a module. And then there's invoke, which lets you call methods on packages or objects, as you would expect. And you give it just your package or object, the name of the method, and additional arguments, and that's it. Of course, such a method may have one or more return values, and those get returned by invoke just like you'd expect it to. This quick example uses Perl 5's petal module. We just create a template object, then we feed it some data in the form of a hash with strings and nested arrays and everything. This method then returns a string, which we then print. So as we can see, it's certainly possible to use Perl 5 modules in Perl 6. But would you really want to program this way? It could certainly look much nicer. It could, it can, and it does. Turns out, Perl 6 is already designed to accommodate interoperation with other languages. It allows for modules to plug into the use mechanism. With this, we can get rid of this P5 object altogether and literally use Perl 5 modules just like we're used to. And even more, you don't even have to load inline Perl 5 yourself, because Perl 6 as a language mandates Perl 5 support, and Rakudo, the Perl 6 implementation, knows that inline Perl 5 can provide this support. So when you use Perl 5 modules this way, Rakudo will just load inline Perl 5 for you. And inline Perl 5 will then create a corresponding Perl 6 package for you, including wrappers for all the functions and methods contained in the original Perl 5 module. So what if such a wrapper is actually a constructor? Well, they do what constructors do. They return objects. With this, you can just call a constructor as if the module was a real native Perl 6 class. The wrappers still underneath just call the invoke I showed you earlier. So again, this is a complete and working example. Now for some real science fiction. What I've shown you so far allows for you to use a large number of CPAN modules already. However, some of them actually expect you to subclass them. Basic bot or HTML parser would be examples for that. Now these inheritance-based APIs usually to expect you to subclass and implement some methods. So how do we subclass a Perl 5 class in Perl 6? Well, it turns out you just do exactly the same as with any other ordinary Perl 6 class. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. Because inline Perl 5 creates a shadow class in Perl 6 for the package you load from Perl 5. And you can just use this shadow class as a base class for your own one. And the base class will still delegate method calls to the underlying Perl 5 class. When you do override methods, they really are exactly what you would expect to find in any Perl 6 class. We have methods and signatures, and can call other methods, probably provided by our base class, like reply or shut down in this IRC path example. Starting up the path is, again, a matter of copy and paste from the documentation, with some syntax changes, and that's pretty much it. Now, HTML parser looks a lot like what I've just shown you. In fact, it's again more or less just some copy and paste with change name. Again, we subclass the generated wrapper class. And we implement the methods. And I very much like the result, especially with Perl 6's method signatures. The code just looks a lot more clean. Now, if you've used HTML parser before, you might throw in that HTML parser does not exactly require you to subclass. You could also pass it some code references, which HTML parser then calls to handle parse events. And by code references, I really mean that. HTML parser's XS implementation is rather inflexible. For example, you could not just pass it callable objects. It would not recognize them as code references. So that's what inline Perl 5 gives you. It used to be that it just creates a callable object, but nowadays it really creates a code reference, which is indistinguishable from any Perl 5 code reference. Even HTML parser will be happy, and again, I could just do what the documentation of the Perl 5 module told me to do. Just for completeness, using our pretty printer class is as straightforward as you can imagine. So, with the knowledge we have now, we can use most of cpan already. So, is it time to call it a success and go have some coffee? Well, I'd like to pick my goals a bit higher than that. I'm not just looking for a treasure. I'm looking for the holy grail. I'm going for the big ones. And to me that means catalyst. That means DBX class. I want to use this. And if I'm starting to bore you already, that's a good thing. Because I'm showing you the same trick for the third time. So why am I making this fuss? Why do I talk about grails? Well, using a DBX class schema is straightforward. But wouldn't it be cool if you could also write one in Perl 6? Well, a DBX class schema is created just by calling some methods on the base class. So this is not exactly a challenge either. But I'm lazy, and I hope you're too. So I want to have my schema created by dbigdumper, and then extended using Perl 6. But dbigdumper does create Perl 5 code. Surely you cannot just add some Perl 6 code to that, can you? Well, the top half of the slide is just some plain normal DBX class schema code generated by dbigdumper, including the comments and the checksums. And instead of just adding methods in Perl 5, however, we used a special package called v6 inline. And by using this package, we declare that the rest of the file is indeed written in Perl 6. And indeed, we find the full title method we've seen earlier. This method even then uses the generated accessors that db provides. Now, the bit to explain here is this line in the middle, the rest of the use v6 inline line. Because what happens is that inline Perl 5 automatically creates a subclass for us in Perl 6. This subclass is used as the base for a Perl 6 class of the same name as the package we are in on the Perl 5 side. This is the class where the Perl 6 methods will actually be added to. Now when we create an object, we really want this to be an object of this generated Perl 6 class. And to achieve that, we have to wrap the constructors and redirect them to the Perl 6 class. Now, constructors in Perl 5 may have arbitrary names, and inline Perl 5 has no way to guess what those names are. So we simply have to tell it what they are called. In the case of this dbags class result source, it's new and inflate result. Those are the two constructors. So, are you convinced yet that we can indeed use the awesome power of the fully armed and operational battle station that is CPAN from Perl 6? Well, I'm still not done yet. If you're like me, at some point you will ask the question, how Perl 6's threading features interact with Perl 5? And if they work? Well, the answer is somewhat. You can create multiple independent Perl 5 interpreters and use them in different threads in Perl 6 code. Those interpreters will not really see each other and will each start out in a blank slate. You can, however, plug those together on the Perl 6 side and push values around. Now, in fact, if you replace Perl 6 in this scenario with another Perl 5 interpreter, you have exactly what iThreads does. So, as far as stability goes, it's actually better than I expected and has probably even improved in the last couple of weeks due to Jonathan's endless concurrency fixes. However, this is really bleeding edge, and I would not exactly recommend this part for production use. Yeah. But it's fun to play around anyway.
Yeah. Not yet.
So far, we've only tried accessing Perl 5 code from Perl 6. But for me, that's still just not good enough, because I really want to bring the two languages back together. In other words, we need a bridge back. And this bridge is called inline Perl 6. I told you earlier that Perl 5 is embeddable, and this is used as a basis for inline Perl 5. While Rakudo, or Morbian to be more precise, isn't. But I did it anyway. I just hope that one of those days we can get a real embedding interfaces for Morbian so I can get rid of a lot of copy and pasted C code. Now, on this slide, you can see 3 ways to say hello world, to have Perl 6 say hello world for you. You always start by loading inline Perl 6, and then call initialize. Then you use one of the functions that are all prefixed by v6:::. Run, for example, is just evaluating some code, same as an inline Perl 5. It's an eval. There's call again to call any named function, and just invoke to, well, invoke a method. There are a couple of questions that this code may arise. First, if you look in the middle, the Maestro class has a global : prefixed. And this is because in Perl 6, really everything, including classes, is lexically scoped by default. So in order to use this class outside of this eval, we have to put it into the global namespace explicitly. Then when we invoke the new method, I need to pass some named parameters. Now, Perl 5 doesn't have this really as a concept. It doesn't know what a name parameter is. So I need to mark them somehow, so inline Perl 6 will understand, okay, I need to pass this as a name parameter. Otherwise, Perl 6 would get like 2 positional arguments string with the just value as a string and hello from Perl 6 as a string. And the v6 name is also the reason why we have to run initialize in the begin block. Because otherwise, we need to add parentheses to the v6 named call, and it just wouldn't look as nice. So, taking a step back, you may still remember this little script. It's the dbx class example I showed earlier, where I wrote part of the results of class in Perl 6. With the help of inline Perl 6, we can still use this in a schema. We can still use the schema, including the Perl 6 extension. In fact, I'm quite confident in telling you that every single feature of inline Perl 5 is also available in inline Perl 6. So why is that? It's really because inline Perl 6 itself doesn't do all that much. It really just loads more VM and Rakudo and inline Perl 5 on top. And then it tricks more VM into thinking that it's just running callbacks. So that's why we have all the this is face palming. So this is why we have all the power of inline Perl 5 still available, because it is there underneath a very thin cover. And yes, you really can have a Perl 6 module that is using a Perl 5 module and use this whole stack again in Perl 5, or the other way around. So after 15 years of growing apart, our code bases can finally grow together again. Now the Perl community speaks in many languages, be it Perl 5 or regular expressions, or C, or Perl 6, or formats or grammars. We speak in many languages, but it's always the same voice. It is the voice you can hear wandering around during coffee breaks at conferences like this. It's the tiny, quiet voice at the back of your head that says, "We are one. We are the Perl community." Because whatever the arguments, whatever the opinions, whatever your preferences are, as long as it gets the job done, and we have fun doing it, it just doesn't matter what part of the toolbox we use. As long as we remember this singular truth, that we are one. Thank you. So, this is the time where you ask questions.
No question, that's thumbs up.
Okay.
So are you actually running Perl 6 for the production?
Nope. Well, our team decided that we're actually going to do this, and then the team sort of fell apart within the space of like 3 months due to illnesses and lots of personal reasons. So our plans got postponed. I finally got back together a good team, and so I think this autumn we are going to start using Perl 6 in production. Yes.
Maybe tell us about it at the London Perl workshop? Or at Fossa?
I hope so. My plan was originally to get some real-world experience using the Perl 6 and inline Perl 5, especially before giving this presentation again. But life just doesn't work out that way always. One thing I noticed, since, as I mentioned, many people have already heard about inline Perl 5, it's curiously, people start writing code like this. It's like they're using the lower level parts for no reason at all. So if you remember anything from this talk, this is the way you're supposed to use it. The simple way. This is what I can tell anyone. Just use some module from Perl 5. And then just pretend it's a Perl 6 module. if it doesn't work out that way, if it somehow gives you strange results, drop by on the Perl 6 IRC channel and tell me about it. Because the goal really is to remove the barrier. Any Perl 5 module you could want to use in Perl 6 should be available and working just like you'd expect it to, without having to know anything.
How can I specify the import list from the Digest MD5 module? So if Digest MD5 exports stuff conditionally, how can I say, for example, Digest the SHA-1, and I only want to import the SHA-1 heads in metal?
Well, how do you think it works?
Well, I could, of course, I tried a little bit and didn't find anything. I didn't find the right. I found the documentation some mentioning of specifying the version.
So you want to import like the MD5 version explicitly?
MD5 hex, for example.
Well, I would try this. It's the equivalent to, you know...
Yeah, okay. So it just works, okay. That's it.
That's the goal. Everything should just work as you intuitively expect it.
I was too scared to try it out.
Drop by on the Perl 6 channel. Ask him.
Yeah, I was with training with other writers and I hit the problem that I forgot asking, because then I use the other and you say get a P5 object. And then I found the documentation, but I only had offline documentation, so.
So I'll take it as a documentation bug.
Thank you.
Okay.
I got another question. Do you see a performance hit if you nest Perl 5 and Perl 6 and so on?
Of course. Would be a wonder if it were otherwise. Well, what I did was, in preparation for the talk, I really wanted to be able to say, yes, you can do this UBX class stuff. So what I did was use our largest application at work and go to the most central database table, our customers and product tables, and just port some of the methods to Perl 6. And then I ran our test suite and compared the timings. And I found about a, let's say, 30% hit in performance. But remember that for when loading in Perl 6, we also have to load all of this Rakudo and inline Perl 5 machinery. And this is added to the test times. So a lot of the 30% are actually just startup penalty. And as these are the most central database tables, there are calls from pretty much everywhere in the code. So this is really kind of worst case thing. So yes, there is a performance penalty, but it's actually not as bad as even I would expect it to be.
I tried out one of your example programs from your talks directory, the threading PL. It should
Well,
really
you started with the simple ones.
Yeah, no, that's the interesting one. Should it run in parallel? Should it be concurrently executing on a multiple core CPU?
I think that's the point.
Yeah, but I have a problem, at least on my machine. I cannot get Perl 6 code to run in parallel. I have the Rakudo from April of this year, maybe it doesn't support it yet.
Oh, it does. It should at least. So, sounds like something we just should just have a look at later on.
Okay.
But I'm definitely interested in this kind of issue.
Okay, we can look at it later.
Good to know. Okay. Then thank you again.